The 1970s are often remembered as loud, expressive, and unpredictable.
It was a decade of cultural experimentation, changing fashion, new media styles, strong personalities, and public images that often felt more relaxed than those of earlier decades. Looking back, many people imagine the 1970s as an era of excess, spontaneity, and constant reinvention.
And in some ways, that image is true. But when we look more closely at the lives of famous people in the 1970s, a more surprising picture begins to emerge.
Behind the public image, many well-known figures lived with routines, habits, and personal rules that were far more disciplined than modern audiences might expect.
This is one of the most interesting things about public life in that decade. While the surface looked freer, many successful people understood that staying relevant, respected, and productive still required structure.
One surprising habit among many public figures of the 1970s was the continued importance of schedule. Actors, broadcasters, musicians, and hosts often lived by tightly organized calendars. Rehearsals, studio sessions, appearances, interviews, flights, meetings, and preparation sessions created a rhythm that left little room for laziness. Even personalities who appeared effortless often relied on strong behind-the-scenes organization.
Another habit that stands out is how seriously many public figures took presentation. The clothing of the 1970s could be bold, colorful, and expressive, but presentation still mattered deeply. Famous people understood that appearance shaped perception. The way they dressed in public, the way they entered a room, the way they spoke in interviews, and the way they handled audiences all influenced reputation. This was not vanity alone, it was strategy.
In a decade in which media exposure expanded and personality became more central to branding, presentation became part of professional survival. Looking confident, calm, and distinctive helped people remain memorable in an increasingly crowded public world.
Another surprising habit was the role of privacy. Even as the culture became more open in some ways, many famous people still protected large parts of their private lives. They might be recognized globally, but they often maintained boundaries around family, home, finances, and personal routines. The idea that every opinion, every meal, every problem, and every emotional reaction should be made public simply did not exist in the way it does today.
This created a different relationship between public figures and the public. People knew the star, but not every detail. They saw the image, but not every private conflict. They admired the personality, but mystery still remained. And that mystery gave many famous people a kind of lasting presence that feels rare now.
Reading and information habits also mattered more than some may assume. Many respected public figures of the 1970s remained serious readers, researchers, or preparers in their fields. Interviewers studied their guests, actors studied scripts and roles, business leaders reviewed reports and trends, politicians prepared speeches and briefings. While not every celebrity fit this pattern, discipline of mind still separated those who merely appeared famous from those who carried real weight.
There was also a surprising respect for repetition. Today, repetition is often seen as boring, but in the 1970s, many successful people accepted that mastery required repetition. Singers repeated rehearsals, hosts repeated introductions, speakers repeated preparation. Public figures refined mannerisms, phrases, timing, and posture through repeated use. Their confidence often came not from spontaneity, but from familiarity.
That is one reason so many of them looked natural on camera. They were practiced. Another revealing habit involved social conduct. Despite the changing cultural climate, many famous people still operated with a strong awareness of etiquette, hierarchy, and role. They knew when to speak, when to pause, how to greet others, how to host, and how to maintain formality when needed. The public world of the 1970s may have looked looser than that of the 1950s, but many successful people still understood the value of controlled behavior.
Even among wealthy and influential figures, habits of moderation appeared more often than expected. Yes, there were visible displays of luxury, but many respected millionaires and public figures still thought carefully about durability, reputation, and how wealth was perceived. In many circles, wastefulness could damage one's image. Measured confidence often communicated more than loud spending.
This pattern reminds us that public success in the 1970s was often built on hidden discipline. The decade may be remembered for personality, but personality alone was rarely enough. Behind many recognizable names were routines of preparation, habits of image management, strong social instincts, and repeated professional effort. The people who lasted understood something important. Freedom without structure leads to decline. Visibility without discipline leads to instability. Attention without substance fades quickly. That is why some figures from the 1970s remain so compelling today.
They reflected the energy of the era, but they weren't consumed by it. They knew how to adapt without dissolving into chaos. They embraced modernity without abandoning standards completely. And in doing so, they revealed something timeless. Even in decades known for change, lasting influence still depends on habits.
When we study the surprising habits of famous people from the 1970s, we begin to see that success was not held together by glamour alone. It was held together by routine, awareness, preparation, and restraint. And perhaps that's what makes the decade so fascinating. It looked loose on the surface, but underneath, many of its most visible people were still living by rules.